Have you ever had that feeling, that bone-deep certainty that you know your own story? You know who you are, where you come from, and what the foundation of your life is built on? I did. My name is Eliza Reed. I am an architect, and for 32 years I believed that my foundation was solid, built on love, sacrifice, and a family that, while not perfect, was a safe haven. I believed that my parents, David and Carol Reed, were the very definition of hard-working, middle-class Americans who had sacrificed everything for their two children. I believed that my younger brother, Julian, was just a free spirit, a struggling artist who needed a little more support than I did. I was the responsible daughter, the stable one. As someone who never asked for much because I never felt I needed to, I was wrong about it all. Deeply and devastatingly wrong. What I thought was a concrete foundation was actually a carefully constructed facade, and last month I found a single document that brought it all crashing down. It all started as usual with a simple act of kindness on a rainy Saturday afternoon. My parents had called me a few days earlier, their voices a familiar mix of fake helplessness and genuine affection. "Eliza, honey," my mother Carol had said on the phone, "we finally decided to clean out the attic. It's a real battleground up there. Your father's back is hurting again, and you know him, he'll never admit it." I could almost hear my father, David, grumbling in the background. It was their classic script. I was the dependable daughter, the one they called for, the jobs that required a strong back and a patient head. My brother Julian was the one they called to share exciting news, to celebrate his latest passing passion, or more often to rescue him from some self-inflicted financial mess. I didn't resent it, at least I told myself. It was just the way it was. The roles had been defined long ago in our childhood home, in suburban Pennsylvania. I was the planner, the builder, the one who colored within the lines. Julian was the dreamer, the artist, the one who saw the lines as mere suggestions. Our parents encouraged this. They praised my grades and steady career path, but their eyes really lit up when Julian showed off a new painting, no matter how abstract, or spoke enthusiastically about a new art movement he was involved in. They saw his whimsy as genius, my stability as, well, just stability. So that Saturday, I drove 45 minutes to their house, the house where I grew up, with a box of donuts and a willingness to help. The air inside smelled of dust and old memories. My dad patted me on the shoulder, as always, a little too hard, and my mom kissed me on the cheek, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender and hairspray. For hours we worked. We sorted through boxes of old holiday decorations, my childhood drawings that my mom couldn't bear to throw away, and photo albums that captured our lives in shiny, happy squares. It was nostalgic. We laughed about my terrible high school fashion choices, and the time Julian tried to build a rocket in the backyard with Dad's lawnmower engine. Throughout it all, the roles remained the same. My dad directed, my mom reminisced, and I did most of the heavy lifting. Around 3 o'clock, I was in the farthest, darkest corner of the loft, a space under the eaves that I hadn't explored in years. It was cramped and hot, the only light coming from the flashlight on my phone. Behind a stack of Dad's old vinyl records, I saw it. A dark wooden box. Not a cardboard box like any other, but a real trunk the size of a briefcase with tarnished brass hardware and a small keyless lock. "Hey, what's this?" I called out, my voice muffled by the low ceiling. My dad came closer, peering into the darkness. "Oh," that he said, his voice suddenly flat. "Just some of your grandmother's old things. Your mother kept them after she died. My grandmother, Eleanor. My mother's mother. She died when I was 19, a freshman in college. She was an explosive woman, sharp-witty, and the only one in the family who seemed to see the world in clear, unvarnished terms. She had a special fondness for me. While everyone else was dazzled by Julian's artistic talent, my grandmother Eleanor would sit with me for hours examining my detailed Lego creations or my first clumsy blueprints, and she would say, "You see the bones of things, Eliza. Never lose that. Most people just see the paint." Her death had been sudden, a heart attack, and it had hit us all hard. "Can we open it?" I asked, pulling the box into more light. A strange look passed between my parents. It was fleeting, but I saw it. A flash of something. Panic. "There's really nothing in there, honey," my mother said a little too quickly. "Just old letters, recipes, random keepsakes." But her hand went to the necklace, a nervous habit I knew all too well. My curiosity now, a raging fire, took over. The lock was old and simple. I grabbed a screwdriver from my father's toolbox, and after a little fiddling, the latch popped open. The air that escaped smelled of cedar and old paper. Inside, it was a time machine. Neatly bound stacks of letters, a few antique-looking pieces of jewelry, and a small leather-bound diary. But underneath it all was a thick manila envelope. It felt heavy, important. My name, Eliza Catherine Reed, was written on the front in my grandmother's elegant, curving cursive. My heart started to beat a little faster. "Mother, what is this?" I asked, holding it up. My parents were silent. Their faces were pale, their smiles gone, replaced by identical masks of forced neutrality. I didn't wait for an answer. My fingers, trembling slightly, tore through the brittle seal. I pulled out a sheaf of papers held together with a metal clip. The first page was a letter also in my grandmother's handwriting. It began, "My dearest Eliza, if you are reading this, it means that I am gone and certain instructions I left behind have not been followed. I can only hope that you have found it before it is too late." My blood ran cold. Instructions not followed. Before it is too late, I flipped through the letter to see the document underneath. It was a legal document filled with formal, dense language. I scanned the page, my eyes jumping from clause to clause until they stopped on a single paragraph, a single sentence that made the air in my lungs drain in a silent gasp. It was an official notice from a probate attorney dated 12 years ago, just 3 months after my grandmother died. It detailed the final settlement of the Eleanor Hayes Lifetime Trust. And there, in black and white, was an entry that made no sense at all, a string of words that felt like they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's reality. It read disbursement to the beneficiary, Eliza Catherine Reed, in the amount of $5,247,000. $5 million. I read it again, and again. The number didn't change. The box of donuts I'd brought sat on a nearby table, their sweet smell now sickening. The happy photos in the albums scattered around us seemed to mock me. My entire life, every struggle, every sacrifice, every time I lent my brother money I couldn't afford, every time I heard my parents talk about how tight money was, it all flashed before my eyes, distorted and twisted by this unbelievable truth. I slowly raised my head, my eyes finding my parents who stood motionless like statues in a museum of lies. I held up the paper, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "What is this? What the hell is this?" The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of my world falling apart, the sound of my foundation turning to dust. And in that moment, I knew that the story of my life, the story I had believed for 32 years, was a complete fiction, and I was about to find out who the real author was. You see, this story isn't just about money. It's about the stories we're told and the truths we're denied. It's about how far people will go to protect a reality they've built, even if it's built on a lie. If you've ever felt like there was a missing piece to your own story, or if you've ever had to question the people you trust the most, you've come to the right place. It's a long and complicated journey, and I'll tell you every part of it. Before we dive into the chaos that erupted in that attic, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss a single chapter as I unravel this lie and uncover a truth far more shocking than a hidden inheritance. The attic, which had been a cozy space of nostalgia just moments before, was suddenly a crypt. The air was thick, stifling. My parents just stood there, their faces stony with resigned horror, like actors on a stage who had forgotten their lines at the crucial moment. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity, broken only by my own gasping breaths and the patter of rain on the roof. I still held the paper in my hand, which felt both incredibly heavy and utterly meaningless. $5 million. The number echoed in my mind, a chaotic gong that drowned out all rational thought. It was so much money, so life-changing that I couldn't even process it. It was like Monopoly. It had to be a typo. It had to be. But the looks on my parents' faces said it wasn't true. This is the truth. We can explain. My father David finally managed to stammer out. He, the confident patriarch, always ready with a sermon for any occasion, looked small and deflated. He took a half step toward me, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Eliza, honey, you have to understand. We did what we thought was best." Best, the word came out as a choked whisper. I looked from him to my mother Carol, who was now sobbing, her hand covering her mouth as silent sobs shook her body. Best for who? How could hiding $5 million from you be best? I plopped down on an old trunk, the legal document still clutched in my hand. My mind was racing, trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle that didn't quite fit. My entire adult life has been a carefully managed struggle. I worked 2 jobs through college to minimize my student loans. After graduation, I lived in a small, crappy apartment for 6 years to save up for a down payment on my modest apartment. I drive a 10-year-old Toyota. Just last year, I had to withdraw money from my emergency fund to pay for major dental work. Everything. Every financial worry, every savings option, every anxious moment about a bill coming due all come back to me, but now tinged with the sickening hue of this betrayal. And then there was Julian. God, Julian. My little brother, the struggling artist. How many times have I paid his rent? How many loans have I given him that were never paid back? $1,000 for a new set of canvases? $500 for car repairs? $2,000 to pay off credit cards after a bad month. I remember a particularly desperate call a few years ago. He needed $5,000 to avoid eviction. I had just paid off my student loans and was starting to build real savings for the first time in my life. Giving him that money set me back a year. I did it without hesitation because that's what a big sister should do. I ate instant noodles all month to make up for it. I remember telling my parents about it and they sighed, and my mom said, "You're such a good big sister, Eliza. We don't know what she'd do without you." The memory now makes me literally sick to my stomach. They knew. They knew I was draining my meager savings to help my brother while they sat on a fortune that belonged to me. "It's for Julian," my mother finally managed, her voice choked with tears. "All for him." I looked at her, my confusion momentarily overtaking my anger. "What are you talking about? It says for me here. My name is on here." "Your grandmother. She doesn't understand." My father interjected, his confidence returning as he began to build his story, his justification. "She was a wonderful woman, but she was tough. She saw your stability, your success, and she saw Julian's struggles. In her mind, you were the safe choice. She wanted to reward you for being responsible." He said responsible as if it were a strange but ultimately unimportant personality trait. "But we knew better," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "We're realistic. You'll be fine, Eliza. You have a career, you have a mind. You'll always find your way. But Julian, he's different. He's a sensitive soul. The world is too harsh for someone like him. One small setback could shatter him completely." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. They had made themselves the saviors of this story, the protectors of their vulnerable son from a cruel world and an uncomprehending grandmother. They had painted a picture of Julian as a delicate flower that needed a hothouse to survive, and me as a sturdy oak tree that could withstand any storm. "So Grandma dies, and you see her will," I said, my voice cold. Each word pronounced with precision. "You see, she left you a life-changing sum of money and you decide she was wrong." "She wasn't wrong, Eliza," my mother interjected, her voice pleading. "It's just, you don't see the big picture. You're not here every day to see how Julian struggles, how the rejection letters from galleries break him. You don't see the despair in his eyes. We do. We're his parents." "And what am I?" I asked, standing up. Am I not your daughter? My worries about loans, my nights staying up all night working on a side project just to make a little extra money. Doesn't that mean anything? My sacrifices don't matter. My father let out a heavy sigh, a sound of exasperation I've heard all my life, usually reserved for when I question his authority. You're making a big deal out of it, Eliza. It's not a sacrifice. It's life. It's how you build character. Easy money corrupts you. It softens you. For Julian, it was a lifeline. For you, it's a burden. That's when I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, bitter sound that came from deep within my chest. A burden. $5 million would be a burden. Freedom from debt, the ability to pursue one's own passions, the security of knowing that one's future family would be provided for, it was a burden. Their delusion was astonishing. They had lived with this lie for so long that it had become their truth. They truly believed they were doing something noble. I picked up my grandmother's letter, the one I had dismissed in my initial shock. Her voice seemed to rise from the page as clear and sharp as I remembered. My dear Eliza, I read aloud, my voice echoing in the silence of the attic. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and certain instructions I left behind were not followed. I know my daughter Carol and her husband. I know their blind love for Julian. That love, however, well-meaning, is toxic. It prevents him from growing. It excuses his failures. They will drain you to keep you afloat, and they won't even realize what they are doing. This money is not a gift, Eliza. It is a tool. It is your freedom. Freedom from their expectations, freedom to build your own life, freedom from being a safety net for your brother. Don't let them take that away from you. When I finished reading, no one spoke. My grandmother's words hung in the air, an indictment from the grave. My mother looked down at the floor, ashamed. But my father, his jaw set. She has no right, he said softly, his voice full of defiance. She has no right to interfere in how we raise our children. But it's your money. I shot back my anger now, a cold, focused fire, and you left it to me. So the question isn't why you did it. The question is what you did. What with it? Where's the money? It can't just disappear. My parents exchanged another look. This time there was no panic. It was something else. A complicity. A shared understanding of an even deeper secret. It's safe, my dad said. We didn't spend it if that's what you're thinking. We invested it. I waited. We consulted with a financial planner, he continued, as if that made it legal. We set up a trust. A cold shiver of dread ran down my spine. I was almost afraid to ask the next question, but I had to know. A trust, I asked, in whose name my mother looked up, her tears now dry, leaving shiny streaks on her cheeks. Her expression was a strange mix of maternal guilt and defiance. It's called the Reed Family Art Trust, she said. The sole beneficiary is Julian. The Reed Family Art Trust. The words kept repeating themselves in my head, each repetition sounding more absurd. It sounded noble, official, like something you'd read on a small plaque in a museum. But I knew what it really was. It was a legal construct built from my money, a monument to their deception. The sole beneficiary was Julian, which meant they hadn't just hidden my money. They'd taken it. They'd effectively stolen it and legitimized the theft under the guise of a trust, all out of sight. My initial shock began to harden into something sharper and colder, pure indignation. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt violated. How, I asked, my voice dangerously flat. How could you two do that legally? I'm the named beneficiary. No one can just set up a trust with someone else's assets. My dad now, fully in the role of shrewd financial manager, began to explain. We were the executors of your grandmother's will, he said, his tone as if explaining a complex business concept to a child. That gave us some discretion. We talked to a lawyer. We explained the situation, your stability, and Julian's special needs. We argued that it would be irresponsible to give Julian such a large sum of money at once. But putting it in a trust managed for his artistic benefit was a prudent way to carry out the intent of the will, which was to care for the family. The intention of the will is to give you money, I almost shouted, losing control for a second. It's clearly written, there's no room for interpretation. The law is nuanced, Eliza, he said patronizingly. We found an advisor who understands our vision. We've set it up so that Julian can receive a monthly stipend for living expenses and art supplies. He can also request larger disbursements for special projects or opportunities, as long as they're approved by a board of directors. The board, I laughed scornfully. Let me guess. The board includes you and me. We and our attorney. Yes, my mother confirmed quietly. We just want to make sure the money is used wisely. Wise. I thought about Julian's life for the past 12 years. The life of a struggling artist. He had moved into a large loft in the city's arts district shortly after his grandmother died. At the time, I was sharing a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with a drunk roommate, and I wondered how he could afford it. A wealthy art patron took notice of his work. My parents had told me, their faces beaming with pride. He believed in Julian's talent. As it turned out, the wealthy art patron had been me, an unwilling and unwitting patron. I thought about his travels. The 3-month study trip to Paris and Florence to immerse myself in the masters. The trip to Japan to learn ancient ink painting techniques. Every time he came back with colorful stories and hundreds of photos, I felt a twinge of jealousy, but I suppressed it, telling myself that our lives were simply different. I had chosen the safe path. He had chosen the artist's path. I realize now that his path was not brave. It was paved with gold, my gold. Expensive art supplies, designer clothes, he called, bohemian-style dinners at fancy restaurants he showed off on Instagram, all funded by a trust fund. The deception was profound. It was total. It reshaped not just my life, but his life as well. They didn't just give him money. They built a gilded cage around him. They created a reality where he never faced real failure, never had to worry about rent, never had to work a job he hated just to pay the bills. They robbed him of the opportunity to truly struggle, and therefore the opportunity to truly succeed on his own merits. They turned my brother into a pampered pet on display in a carefully controlled environment, all funded by the future they stole from me. And worst of all, I helped them. Every time I gave him money, I wasn't saving him from eviction. I was simply supplementing his allowance. I was playing the fool, the useful fool in their elaborate play. They had made me feel responsible, pitying him while they were the ones pulling the strings. I wasn't just a daughter. I was a tool in their scheme. I was the shield, the protector of Julian's struggling artist image, so that no one, not even Julian himself, could question the true source of his financial comfort. Maybe he didn't even know. The thought flashed through my mind. Could he be a victim in this too, trapped in a lie he didn't even know about? Does Julian know? I asked, my voice completely drained of warmth. Does he know where the money really comes from? My parents were silent again. This time, their silence was more ominous. He knows there's a trust fund from his grandmother, my mother finally admitted. We told him that she left a small amount of money to both of you, and we pooled it to invest in his career since you'd have a head start. A small amount, I repeated, feeling a wave of nausea rise. Is $5 million a small amount? He doesn't know the exact figure, my father said defensively. There's no need to worry him with such details. He just knows that there's enough money so he can focus on his art without distraction. Distraction. Like paying rent, buying food, or living in the real world. All the things that had shaped me, that had taught me the value of $1 and the satisfaction of hard work, were considered distractions that my brother needed to be protected from. I looked around the attic at the boxes filled with evidence of my life, the science awards, the yearbooks, the pictures of me in my graduation gown. They were all symbols of the path I had chosen, a path of hard work and responsibility. And what was my reward for that? Being lied to, being used, being made the secret funder of my brother's dream life. I had nothing more to say to them. Not now. The argument was over. Their explanations, their excuses, they were like ashes in my mouth. I carefully folded my grandmother's document and placed it and her letter in my inside coat pocket. I felt the heaviness of them against my chest, a tangible reminder of the weight of the truth. I walked toward the loft stairs, each step deliberate and heavy. "Where are you going, Eliza?" my mother asked her, voice panicked as if she thought one more conversation could repair 12 years of deception. I paused at the top of the stairs, turning to look at them one last time. They looked pathetic amid the ruins of our past two conspirators whose plans had just been exposed. "I don't know," I said honestly, and it was the truth. I had no idea what my long-term plans were. I didn't know how to begin to repair the damage. But I knew the first thing I had to do. "I'm going to find my brother," I said, my voice drained of emotion. "I think it's time for him and me to have an honest conversation." For the first time in our lives, I didn't wait for them to answer. I walked down the stairs through the house I thought was mine and out into the cold, rainy air. As I closed the car door, I knew one thing for sure: the Reed family, as I knew it, no longer existed. And I was the one who would have to decide what could be built from the rubble. The drive to the downtown area where Julian lived was a blur of windshield wipers and neon smudges. Each red light seemed to last forever, giving me too much time to think, to let my anger and pain and disbelief swirl into a raging storm in my chest. I practiced what I would say, trying to organize my accusations into a logical structure the way I would with a blueprint. But emotions don't follow lines and angles. They're messy, unpredictable things. Julian's building was a converted old warehouse with huge windows and exposed brick. It was the epitome of industrial chic, a place where struggling artists could only dream of living. When I rang the bell of his penthouse, the shrill buzz seemed to echo in the tense silence of the hallway. The door opened, and Julian stood there, squinting against the dim light of the hallway. He was tall and thin, with his trademark messy hair and a cobalt blue paint stain on his cheek. He wore an expensive cashmere sweater covered in paint, a perfect contradiction that encapsulated his life. "Liza, what are you doing here?" he asked, the surprise in his voice quickly replaced by delight. "Oh my God, you look like you've seen a ghost. Come in, come in. I'm making coffee." He turned and walked inside, assuming I would follow as usual. His apartment was, as usual, both artfully neat and deliberately messy. Huge canvases leaned against the walls, some blank, others with abstract splashes of color. Light from the floor to ceiling, windows illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. It was spacious and beautiful. And it was all a lie. "Aren't you going to ask why I'm here, Julian?" I asked, my voice echoing in the vast space. I was still standing in the doorway. She stopped at the stainless steel counter. "Well, I guess you miss your sexy little brother," she said with a smirk, but the smile faded when she actually looked at me. "Wait, what's wrong? You're scaring me." "I just got home from my parents," I said, stepping inside and closing the heavy door behind me. The click of the latch seemed to mark the point of no return. I was in the attic, cleaning. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed by a flash of concern. "Oh," she said, her voice low. "Mom and Dad always said they needed to clean up there." They did. With my help, I continued circling an expensive-looking metal sculpture. And I found a few things. Things that belonged to Grandma Eleanor. She said nothing, just stood there holding a china mug. "I found a box," I said, facing her directly. "And in that box, I found an envelope with my name on it. Do you want to guess what was inside?" Her expression became alert. "Liza, what are you talking about? The Reed Family Art Trust," I said, and I saw the relief flash across her face. "Oh, so that's what she thought." "Mom and Dad told me about it," she said. "They explained it. Grandma left some money for both of us." "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Stop right there. Don't repeat the lie they fed you. Tell me in your own words, what do you think happened?" She put down her cup, clearly confused by my harshness. "They said she left me an inheritance. That I was settled in my career, so they pooled the pieces and invested it so I could have a real chance at art without having to wait tables all my life. They said it was a family decision. To support me. A family decision," I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Funny I don't remember being asked. "And a little money. Is that how they described it? I don't know, Liza. I never asked for an exact figure. She said, her voice rising with defense. That's rude. Then let me tell you the figure, I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a fierce whisper. It's $5 million. And it's not both of us. It's yours. All of it. Every cent. The shock on Julian's face was almost genuine. He blinked, shaking his head as if to clear my words. Number. That's impossible. Mom and Dad wouldn't. They did, I said. They took my money and gave it to you. 12 years, Julian. This attic, trips to Europe, these art supplies. I waved my hand around the room. None of this is the result of my talent. It's the result of my sacrifice. A sacrifice I didn't even know I was making. It's not true, he shouted, his disbelief now tinged with anger. I worked hard, I laughed. Do you know what hard work is? Have you ever had to choose between paying your electric bill and buying groceries? Have you ever had to take on a boring design project that you hated just to pay off your credit card debt? No, because whenever you're in trouble, who do you call? You call me, and I, like an idiot, give you the little money you worked so hard to earn while you're living off the interest from my stolen inheritance. Finally, the truth seemed to sink in, but its response wasn't regret or shame. It was a bitter defensiveness. Oh, come on, Liza, it sneered. Stop playing the victim. You've always been good with money. You'll be fine. You've always been fine. What about me? Where would I be without that money? I'd really give up art. Is that what you want? That's when it hit me. They had succeeded. Their deception had been so ingrained that it had become its truth. In its world, it was entitled to this. It was an artist, a sensitive soul. My career and stability weren't the result of hard work, but some unfair advantage it didn't have. My sacrifice wasn't a sacrifice. It was just the natural state of things. God, I whispered, taking a step back. They did this to me. They made me into this person. What kind of person, he demanded, crossing his arms. Someone who believes he deserves what he has, someone who is grateful for a family that supports him. No, I said, my voice cold as ice. Someone who believes his comfort is more important than the truth. Someone who would rather live a beautiful lie than face a harsh reality. I am not a struggling artist, Julian. I never was. I am just a rich boy putting on a show. My words hit home. A flash of anger flashed in his eyes. Get out of here, he hissed. Get out of my apartment. Don't worry, I said, moving toward the door. But let me tell you this. Your comfortable life, your little show, it's all coming to an end. I'm taking back what's mine. I opened the door and didn't look back. As I stepped out of the building into the rain, I stopped crying. The storm inside me had subsided, leaving a cold, determined silence. That conversation had erased any lingering doubts. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate betrayal cemented by 12 years of entitlement and self-deception. My family had chosen sides long ago, and now so had I. When I returned to my apartment, I felt like I was moving into another world. The familiar walls of my space, a place I had designed and built with my own hands, now seemed to belong to someone else, a more naive Eliza, who believed the stories she had been told. For the first hour, I just sat on the sofa staring at the raindrops running down the window, letting the full weight of the event crash down on me. My parents' betrayal, Julian's vested interests. 12 years, more than a third of my life had been shaped by this lie. I let myself feel it all: rage, heartbreak, and a deep sadness for the family I had lost, or perhaps the family I had never really had. Tears came, not weak tears, but hot, angry tears. It was a necessary catharsis. And then as the last tears dried, something changed. The architect in me, the problem solver, the one who sees structure in chaos, began to emerge. I had spent my life turning abstract ideas into concrete plans, building solid foundations from empty lots, and that was exactly what I needed to do now. My old family had collapsed into ruins. It was time to design something new from the ashes. I stood up, walked to my desk, and pulled out a blank notebook and a pen. At the top of the page, I wrote action plan. I was no longer the victim in this story. I would be the architect of my own justice. The first point of my plan was simple: get legal advice. I couldn't fight this battle alone. My parents had spent 12 years building their legal fortress with a lawyer on their side. I needed someone smarter, tougher, and willing to tear down those walls. I spent the rest of the evening researching law firms that specialized in wills and trusts. I read reviews, looked at cases, and looked for a name that stood out. The next morning, I made my first call. The lawyer I chose was a woman named Anya Sharma. She had a reputation for being ruthless, a courtroom shark with a track record of toppling supposedly unbreakable trusts. During our first consultation, I laid out my story, my voice calm and methodical, presenting the documents I had found as evidence. Mrs. Anya listened attentively, her sharp eyes not missing a single detail. "This is a mess," she said when I was done, but there was no pity in her voice, only professional analysis. They used their role as executors to go against the will's clear intentions. It's called breach of fiduciary duty. The problem is the statute of limitations can be a hurdle. 12 years is a long time. "So there's nothing I can do?" I asked, a cold sense of dread creeping into my resolve. "I'm not saying that," Anya replied, leaning forward. "I'm saying we need leverage. We need to prove that this wasn't a misunderstanding of your grandmother's intentions. We need to prove that it was a deliberate act of deception from the start. We need something that shows your grandmother knew what they were going to do and tried to stop it." Her words triggered a memory. The box. The dark wooden box. I had been so focused on the envelope and the letter that I had missed what else was inside. "There's more," I said, both to her and to myself. "In that box, there's a diary." That evening, I drove back to my parents' house. I didn't call ahead. I used the spare key I kept and snuck in like a thief. The house was quiet and dark. They were probably out to dinner. Heart pounding, I climbed into the attic. The box was still there, left behind in the chaos of our interrupted cleaning. I grabbed it along with a few childhood photo albums, evidence of the life they claimed to protect, and left as quickly as I had come. Back in my apartment, I carefully opened my grandmother's leather-bound diary. The pages were yellowed with age, and her handwriting, like her letters, was both elegant and forceful. At first, it had been mostly daily notes, thoughts about gardening books she'd read our visits. But as I turned to the last months of her life, the tone changed. She began to write more about my parents, about her worries. She wrote about the conversations they had about Julian and my future. She noted their obsession with Julian's artistic career and how they took my independence for granted. "David and Carol think that love means removing all obstacles," she wrote in one entry. "They don't understand that it's those obstacles that make them strong. They're building a cage for Julian, not a launching pad." And then I found it. An entry dated just 2 weeks before she died. It was the smoking gun. "Had a bad argument with Carol and David tonight," she wrote. "I told them my plans for the will about leaving the bulk of the estate to Eliza. I explained my reasons that Eliza had the head for it, and that it would give her the freedom to really fly high, perhaps start her own company someday. As for Julian, I would leave a small amount, enough to help him, but not enough to cripple him." David said I was unfair. Carol cried, saying I was picking a favorite grandchild. "They begged me to split it evenly or even give a larger share to Julian. They said that if I didn't, they would find a way to fix it after I was gone." I looked my daughter straight in the eye and said, "If you dare betray my trust and my wishes, I will never forgive you in this world or the next. They don't think I'm serious, but I've written this down. I'll talk to my lawyer tomorrow to add a clause. I have to protect Eliza from her own parents' love." I closed the diary, my hands shaking. There it was. This wasn't just proof of her intentions. This was proof of a premeditated plot. They had been warned. They had been explicitly told not to do exactly what they had done. And they did it anyway. My grandmother hadn't been able to add that clause to her will in time, but she had left me something even better, a weapon. The next day, I saw Anya Sharma again. I placed the diary on her polished mahogany desk. "I think this is the leverage we need," I said. She read the entry, then read it again. A slow, sharp smile spread across her lips. "Miss Reed," she said, looking at me across the table, "this isn't a lever, this is a sledgehammer. Now let's talk about how we're going to tear down those walls." For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I no longer feel like a victim caught in a storm. I have a plan. I have a blueprint. And I'm about to start rebuilding my future. Preparing for confrontation is not like preparing for war. It's like preparing for major surgery. Cold, precise, and stripped of any unnecessary emotion that might shake the hand holding the scalpel. In the days after my meeting with Anya Sharma, I turned my apartment into a war room. We reviewed every document, every financial transaction I could recall, every email, every birthday card with its empty words about working hard. Each piece was part of a larger picture of deception. I was no longer the wounded daughter looking for an apology. I was an architect analyzing a structurally flawed structure looking for weak spots so I could most effectively dismantle it. The meeting was set for Anya's office. A neutral place, a glass and steel fortress where family emotions had no place. When I entered the conference room, they were there. My parents, Julian, and a man in a gray suit who I assumed was their lawyer. They sat on either side of a long mahogany table, a unified mass of defense. My father tried to look commanding, but the tension around his jaw gave him away. My mother looked pale, her hands clenched in her lap. Julian was different. He looked at me with a brazen defiance, the fury of a soon-to-be dethroned king. He believed he was the victim here. I sat across from them next to Anya. The silence was heavy. There were no pleasantries. Anya began, her voice as calm and cool as the table between us. "We are here today to discuss the Reed Family Art Trust," she said, setting a thick file down on the table. "Specifically, its illegitimate origins and mismanagement." Their attorney, Mr. Miller, cleared his throat. Miss Sharma, my client, acted as executor of the estate in the sincere belief that they were carrying out the intentions of Eleanor Hayes to provide for her family. Sincere belief, Anya repeated, a barely perceptible smile playing across her lips. A sincere trust ignored the clear and unmistakable language in the will naming Miss Eliza Reed as the sole beneficiary of a specific sum of money. A sincere trust caused your client to create an entirely new trust, removing the rightful beneficiary and replacing it with another. That is not a sincere trust, Mr. Miller. That is fraud. My dad slammed his hand down on the table. "Enough. We did it to protect our son. Eliza had everything. She had a career, a stable life. Julian had talent, but he needed nurturing. Nurturing at my expense," I finally said, my voice low and sharp. "Do you know how many nights I stayed up worrying about bills, taking on extra work? Just so I could lend Julian a few $100s. You both knew every time. You sat there watching me burn myself out while you managed my millions to fund his career. It's called character building, Eliza." My dad shot back using his old cliché. "You're stronger for it." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I'm not stronger. I'm just lonelier. You taught me that my hard work was insignificant and my brother's weakness was the only thing that mattered." Julian let out a sneer. "You're jealous," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Just because I pursued my passion and you chose a boring office job, you can't stand to see me succeed." "Success?" I asked. "What is your success built on, Julian? It's bought with my future. Every painting you paint, every trip you take is paid for by opportunities I never had." "Enough," Anya said, her voice cutting through the escalating argument. She looked at their attorney. "Mr. Miller, I believe your client is operating under the delusion that their actions are morally justifiable. So let me present something that will clear things up legally." She slowly pulled another document from her briefcase. It was a copy of my grandmother's diary, opened to the exact page with that last entry. She slid it across the table. My parents looked at it in confusion then. My mother's eyes widened as she recognized the handwriting. I watched them read. I saw the color slowly drain from my father's face. I saw my mother's hands begin to shake as she reread her own mother's warnings, their own threats thrown back at them from the past. They said that if I didn't do this, they would find a way to fix it after I was gone. Anya read the sentence aloud. She recorded that conversation, Mr. Miller. She recorded your client's intent to commit fraud. This is no longer about interpreting a will. This is evidence of a premeditated plot to defraud the rightful beneficiary. Their lawyer read the page, and I saw his shoulders drop subtly. He was a practical man. He knew what this meant. The game was up. Anya leaned back in her chair. So here are your options, she said, her tone shifting from confrontational to commanding. Option 1. We file a civil lawsuit for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. With this evidence, she tapped the journal. We win. We'll get not only the principal back, but also interest, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The Reed family name will be dragged through the mud. And I'm turning this over to the district attorney's office. They might be interested in a high-profile fraud case like this. There could be criminal consequences. She paused, letting the words sink in. My mother let out a choked sob. Option 2, Anya, continued, her voice cold as steel. Within the next 48 hours, your client will begin the process of completely dissolving the Reed Family Art Trust. The entire asset, every penny, including the growth in value over the past 12 years, will be transferred to an account controlled by my client. Your client will sign a confession of wrongdoing and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. They will never have any contact with Miss Reed again unless she initiates it. They will disappear from her life. She looked at them one by one. My dad looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Julian stared into space, his face blank with shock. My mother was sobbing silently. This isn't a negotiation, Anya concluded. This is a choice between losing everything publicly and losing everything quietly. You have 48 hours to decide. The meeting is adjourned. With that, Anya stood up. I did the same, feeling a strange emptiness. I won. I know I won. But as I looked at the broken faces of the people I once called family, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the end. Leaving that law office was like stepping out of a high-pressure area. The air outside, though damp with rain, felt light and fresh. Anya and I didn't say much as we rode down the elevator. She just put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You did well, Eliza. You were strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty. The rage that had fueled me for days had dissipated, leaving a painful void. There was no sense of triumph, no joy. There was only a cold, hard awareness that I had just officially destroyed my family. Perhaps it had been destroyed for a long time, and I had merely signed the death certificate. I don't know what happened in that conference room after I left. I can imagine the accusations, the tears, the dead silence. I can imagine the ride home, 3 people trapped in a car with the ugly truth of what they had done. For the next 24 hours, I heard nothing. I turned off my phone, unable to face the pleading calls or angry messages that I knew would come. I just sat in my apartment, the silence louder than the screaming. I looked through the photo albums I'd taken from the attic. There were Julian and me, grinning, toothlessly building sandcastles on the beach. There were my parents, young and happy, hugging us. Was it all a lie? Or had the lie come later, a cancer that slowly grew and ate away at everything good? On the evening of the second day, just as anxiety began to gnaw at my emptiness, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, but then some instinct made me answer. "Hello, Liza." The voice on the other end was familiar, but different. It had lost its confidence, its arrogance. It was small and broken. It was Julian. I was silent, waiting. I'm at the coffee shop downstairs," he said. "I know you said. I know the lawyer said. But can I see you? Just 5 minutes. Please." There was something in his voice, a genuine desperation I'd never heard before. Against all my better judgment, I said yes. When I walked into the cafe, he was sitting at a table in the corner, huddled over a cold cup of coffee. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and puffy. He looked 10 years older. For the first time in years, he looked like someone who was actually struggling. I sat down across from him. "I have 5 minutes," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He looked up at me, and there was no anger in his eyes, only deep, unending shame. "They agreed," he said quietly. "They called the lawyers this morning. They're going to dissolve the trust. They'll do everything your lawyers asked." I just nodded. "I'd expected that. That's not why I'm here," he continued, his voice shaking. After the meeting, I read it. The diary. I made them give me a copy." He took a deep breath. "She tried to protect me from them. And she tried to protect you from them. You never realized." He told me about what happened after I left, about the terrible fight that broke out. Julian, for the first time in his life, had actually faced his parents. He asked them the questions I had always wanted to ask. "Do you really think I'm that weak?" he shouted at them. "Do you think my art has no value without your money? You didn't support me, you own." The betrayal he felt wasn't about the money. It was about his autonomy. They didn't believe in him. They never really did. They saw his talent as a vanity project that needed funding, not a real path he could take on his own. The lie didn't just take my money. It took away the chance for my brother to truly fail, and therefore the chance for him to truly succeed. "I was living in a bubble," he said, looking down at his hands. "And I didn't even know it. I hated you for bursting it. But, God, I think I hate them even more for building it in the first place." We sat in silence for a moment. The hum of the coffee grinder and the chatter around us seemed to belong to another universe. "I'm sorry, Liza." He finally whispered the words barely audible. "Not for the money. For believing a lie. For making you feel like you didn't matter. I'm sorry for being a bad brother." I looked at my brother, really looked at him for maybe the first time in 12 years. I didn't see a pampered artist anymore. I saw a lost young man whose world had just been turned upside down. There was no forgiveness in me, not yet. The wound was too deep, but there was a small glimmer of something else. Maybe understanding. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "No trust fund. I don't know," he admitted with a sad, unhappy smile. "Maybe get a job. Pay your own rent. Maybe really struggle for once. Maybe that's what I always needed to do." It stood up. That's all I wanted to say. "Thanks for listening." It turned to leave, but then it stopped. "By the way," it said, not turning back, "that painting, you always liked the one of the coast in Maine that Grandma took us to. I put it away. I want you to have it." And then it walked out of the cafe, leaving me alone with my coffee and the broken pieces of our family. Its apology. It didn't fix anything, but it did change something. It proved that at least one person in my family was capable of facing the truth. My money was on its way back. But I realized that the real battle was now beginning, the battle to figure out how to live with the truth and decide whether anyone was worth salvaging from the rubble. The transfer of assets was swift and surprisingly cold. Anya Sharma handled everything with the efficiency of a surgeon. Within a week, the Reed Family Art Trust was gone. A huge sum far greater than the original $5 million, thanks to 12 years of market growth, had been transferred to a new account in my name. When I first saw the balance on my computer screen, I didn't feel joy or excitement. I felt a huge weight. It wasn't like winning the lottery. It was like receiving compensation for a tragic accident, an accident that had taken my family away. The first thing I did with that money was write a big check to Anya Sharma. She deserved every penny. The second thing I did was leave the city. I needed space. I needed some air that wasn't poisoned by lies. I rented a little house on the beach in Maine, the same beach Julian had mentioned in the painting. I told my clients I needed an extended sabbatical to work on a personal project, which wasn't entirely untrue. That personal project was me. For a month I walked miles along rocky beaches, the salty air clearing my lungs and the cool Atlantic breeze clearing my head. I filled sketchbooks not with building plans, but with thoughts and memories and questions. I was trying to redesign my life. Money changed everything. It gave me a freedom I never dreamed of. I could quit my job. I could travel the world. I could buy a penthouse like Julian's, only bigger. But I realized that wasn't what I wanted. My grandmother had said that money was a tool for freedom. But freedom for what? In the quiet of Maine, I began to find answers. My architectural career, the safe path that everyone had praised, I realized I hadn't really loved for years. It had become a means to an end, paying the bills, building a stable life. But now that end was gone. So what was my true passion? The answer came from a memory of my grandmother. You see the bones of things, she had said. She had seen me for what I was: a builder, a problem solver. But maybe I was building the wrong thing. Instead of steel and glass buildings, maybe I should be building something else. An idea began to form, vague at first, then gradually becoming more concrete. I thought about my own life, about how financial scarcity had shaped my choices. I thought about the countless other talented people out there, artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, who had great ideas but were held back by the burden of reality. What if I could offer them something I never had, not a gilded cage but a launch pad, a solid foundation on which to build their dreams? When I returned to the city, I was a different woman. The void had been filled with a new purpose. I met with Anya Sharma not as a client, but as a potential business partner. I presented my idea, the Eleanor Hayes Foundation, named after my grandmother, a nonprofit organization that would provide grants and scholarships to talented individuals in the arts, sciences, and small businesses who came from disadvantaged backgrounds. It would not be charity. It would be an investment in human potential. Anya was impressed. She not only agreed to serve on the board, but also offered to provide pro bono legal services to establish the foundation. Over the next few months, I threw myself into my work. It was the hardest, but also the most rewarding work I've ever done. I resigned from my architecture firm, a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I sold my apartment and moved into a smaller, more modest space. I realized that I didn't need luxury. I needed meaning. I have no contact with my parents. They kept their end of the bargain. They disappeared. I hear from them occasionally through mutual family friends. They sold our childhood home and moved to a retirement community in Florida. The story they tell people is that they want to live somewhere warmer, but I know the truth. They are running away from the ghosts in that attic. I don't feel hatred for them anymore, just a deep, distant sadness. I kept in touch with Julian. Not often, just brief messages here and there. He had moved out of that loft. He told me he was working part-time at a coffee shop and sharing a small apartment with 2 roommates. For the first time in his life, he was paying his own rent. He said his art had changed. He was no longer painting abstract, colorful paintings. He was painting portraits of people he met at the coffee shop, the tired, honest faces of ordinary people. They have stories, he wrote to me in a message. Real stories. I wasn't ready to meet him, but I didn't close that door completely. Late one afternoon, about 6 months after the confrontation, I was in the temporary offices of the Eleanor Hayes Foundation, a small co-working space I rented by the month, when a delivery man arrived. He was carrying a large, carefully wrapped package. There was no return address. I opened it. Inside was a painting of the Maine coast. It was more beautiful than I remembered, the turbulent blues and grays of the ocean rendered perfectly. But there was something else. In the lower right corner, instead of the usual ornate Julian, there was a simple signature, "Your brother." I hung the painting on the wall across from my desk. It was a reminder, not of what I had lost, but of what could be rebuilt from the pieces. The foundation had been laid. The rebuilding had only just begun. The Eleanor Hayes Fund launched a year after that fateful day in the attic. The launch was a modest affair held in a small local gallery. There were journalists, community leaders, and the first potential applicants. As I stood at the podium looking out at the hopeful faces in the crowd, I felt a deep sense of rightness. My grandmother's letter, which I kept with me like a talisman, had said that this money was a tool for freedom. And this was that freedom not just for me, but freedom I could give to others. The fund has been more successful than I could have ever imagined. In its first year, we funded a young marine biologist studying the decline of coral reefs, a writer writing her first novel about the immigrant experience, and a chef opening a farm-to-table restaurant in a food-stressed area. Their stories became my stories. Their success became my redemption. My life had settled into a new peaceful rhythm. My work had meaning. I had a close circle of friends who knew me only as Eliza, the founder of a nonprofit, not as the heir to a stolen fortune. The existence of my old family had receded into a distant corner of my mind, like a bad dream that had passed. Which is why when I got the call, I was completely unprepared. It was a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing grant applications when my phone rang. It was a number from Florida. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a sales call. But something made me answer. "Hello, Eliza Reed," a strange woman's voice asked. "Yes." "Who's calling? My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a nurse at Palm Gardens Healthcare Center. I'm calling about your mother, Carol Reed." My heart stopped. "My mother, what's wrong? She was admitted to the hospital last night," the nurse said. "She had a stroke. I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's serious." My world was spinning. Despite the distance, despite the betrayal, the news hit me like a physical punch. "Where's my dad?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Is he there?" "He's here," the nurse said, her voice oddly hesitant. "That's part of why I called. Your dad's condition is complicated. Eliza, I think you should come here." The flight to Florida was a jumble of panic and memories. I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 2 years. I wasn't even sure what I would say. When I arrived at the hospital, a stark beige building that smelled of antiseptic and despair, nurse Sarah met me in the lobby. She was a middle-aged woman with kind but tired eyes. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said. "Your mother is in the intensive care unit. Her condition is stable, but she is still unconscious." "And my father?" I asked, dreading the answer. The nurse sighed. "Come with me." She led me down another hallway to another part of the hospital. It was the long-term care area for patients who needed constant supervision. She stopped in front of a room and looked at me sympathetically. "Your father has been here for 6 months," she said softly. "He has late-stage Alzheimer's. Most days he doesn't recognize anyone, not even his wife." I looked through the small window in the door. My father was sitting in an armchair staring out the window. He was thin and gaunt, his white hair a tangle. His dignity, his paternal confidence was gone. He looked like a stranger, a lost and confused old man. "Your mother has been taking care of him alone," Sarah continued. "She didn't tell anyone, not even her brother. She brought him here after they moved in when things got too much for her. The stroke, we believe it was stress-related." I leaned against the wall, feeling like I was about to fall. The picture I'd painted in my head, my parents enjoying a sunny retirement in Florida, tormented by their guilt, was shattered. The truth was worse and far more complicated. My mother wasn't just a con artist. She was a caregiver silently carrying an unimaginable burden. She had been guarding another secret, not out of greed, but maybe pride or shame. "Why didn't she call me?" I whispered. "After everything, why didn't she call?" I asked her that once, Sarah said. She said, "I took her future away. I can't take her present away too." The words hit me harder than Julian's punch. It was a confession, a remorse, spoken not under the pressure of a lawyer, but in the silence of a hospital corridor. Anya had ordered them out of my life, and my mother, in her own tragic way, had obeyed that order to the letter. I walked into my father's room. He looked up at me as I approached, his clear blue eyes blank. There was no recognition. "Hello," he said, his voice as thin as paper. "Are you the new nurse?" "No," I said, my throat closing. "I'm an old friend." I sat with him for a while in the silence of a Florida hospital room, trying to reconcile this man, this fragile stranger with the giant who had dominated my childhood and betrayed my adulthood. There were no easy answers. There was no simple forgiveness. There was only the painful complexity of a family torn apart, not by a single act, but by 1,000 tiny cuts of secrets and lies. And I realized that no matter how far I had come, I was not free. I couldn't, because some structures can't just be torn down. You must find a way to survive among their ruins. The following weeks passed in a blur of hospital corridors, doctor conversations, and sleepless nights in anonymous hotel rooms. My mother remained in a coma, a motionless silhouette amid the steady beeping of machines. I spent hours at her bedside, sometimes reading to her, sometimes just sitting in silence, watching the face I thought I knew so well. The anger I had carried for the past 2 years had evaporated, replaced by something more complicated, a deep sadness for all of us, for the people we could have been to each other. While my mother fought in silence, I had to make practical decisions. I called Julian. When I told him about Dad and then Mom, there was a dead silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked sob. He flew to Florida the next day. Seeing Julian at the airport was strange. He looked older, thinner, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that had never been there before. Gone was the arrogance, gone was the self-righteousness. Just a young man in pain. We navigated this nightmare together. For the first time in our lives, we were a team. We went through Mom's papers, sorted through her medical bills, and made difficult decisions about Dad's long-term care together. In the small apartment my parents rented, we found a world of closely guarded secrets. There were stacks of books on caring for Alzheimer's patients. There was a notebook detailing Dad's decline written in Mom's shaky handwriting, filled with heartbreaking moments and fleeting glimmers of hope. She faced this alone, believing she had no right to ask for help from the children she had hurt. A week after I arrived, my mother woke up. It wasn't a dramatic moment like in the movies, just a blink, a soft groan. When she saw Julian and me standing by her bed, tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She couldn't say much, the stroke had affected her ability to speak. But she held out her shaking hand, and Julian took it. I hesitated, then placed mine on theirs. The three of us, a broken family, connected by a thin thread of tragedy and a complicated history. I stayed in Florida for another month, working remotely for the foundation while Julian got settled. We found a wonderful nursing home for Dad where he could receive professional care. Julian decided to stay in Florida. "I can't leave them like this," he told me one evening as we sat on the balcony overlooking the bay. "I've spent my whole life being taken care of. Maybe it's time for me to be the caregiver." He found a job at a local pottery studio teaching beginner classes. It was a humble job, but he seemed to find a kind of peace in it. The day I left, I went to the hospital to say goodbye to my mother. She was able to speak in short, slurred sentences. She looked frail and small in the hospital bed. "Are you going?" she asked, her voice, a shadow of its former self. "Yes," I said, "but I'll be back. Julian will be here, and I'll call every day." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, "you were right. I knew what she was talking about. About me. About Julian. About the mistakes she'd made." "I know," I said. I leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture I hadn't made since I was a little girl. It wasn't full forgiveness. Maybe it never would be. But it was acceptance. An acknowledgement that life isn't the clean lines of a blueprint, but messy shades of gray. As I flew home watching the clouds drift by below, I felt a final change take place inside me. The lie had defined my life for so long. It had given me rage, purpose, and eventually a new career, but now it had lost its power. It was only part of my story, not the whole story. My life now is the Eleanor Hayes Foundation. It's video calls with Julian where we talk about normal things, the weather work, a good movie. It's hanging a picture of the Maine coast in my office, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a reminder of the complexity of love and the resilience of the human spirit. I didn't get my old family back. It was gone forever in that attic. But from the broken pieces, something new began to form. A different, more genuine relationship with my brother built on truth and shared responsibility. A sad yet compassionate understanding of my mother. And most importantly, a solid relationship with myself. My grandmother was right. She gave me a tool, and it set me free. But the greatest freedom doesn't come from money. It comes from facing the truth no matter how ugly and choosing to build something meaningful from the rubble. I am Eliza Reed. I am an architect. And finally, after a long and painful journey, I have learned to build on a solid foundation, a foundation made of truth, acceptance, and the strength to redesign my own future. My story is not a tragedy of betrayal. It has become a story of reconstruction, and it is a foundation that I know will never collapse.